Welcome to our movie recap channel, your ultimate destination for in-depth and engaging movie summaries, whether you're looking to catch up on the latest blockbusters or revisit classic films. The film starts with an elderly person pursuing a dating site. Simultaneously, we see an older man who is likewise setting up his dating profile, and they are both bereft. The old pair then match, and they soon start talking with one another. The two of them focus on their lives, and after discussing them, they decide to meet for dinner. In the following scene, the man shows up at a restaurant and heads towards her table. After exchanging their greetings, the lady shares that her significant other and son have died, and now she gestures her grandson, who lives with her. The man, in turn, shares that his wife passed away a long time ago. As they settle in, the man admits that he has used a fake name, Brian, on the dating site, and his real name is Courtnay. Hearing this, the lady admits that she also used a false name online. Her real name is McLeish. The two of them laugh loudly at the coincidence of their mutual deception. After their brief meeting, Betty is picked up by her grandson Stephen. Later on, Roy heads to a club, where his friend, Vincent, is already seated with two others. Roy eagerly shares a business plan with them, promising to double their money quickly. He informs them that he pretended to be a banker and approached a Russian businessman for an investment scheme. The businessman will invest £800,000 in their scheme, but he wants Roy and his group to contribute a small amount just to ensure everything is safe. Roy explains that they will need to collectively put in £200,000 and their money will be doubled. Impressed by his pitch, Vincent and the two men agree to participate and promise not to reveal their true identity. However, one of them, Bryn, accidentally reveals his name. At that moment, Roy gets a call from his previous date, Betty. The scene then moves to a movie hall, where Roy and Betty are on their second date. After the movie ends, they decide to head back home, but Roy's knees suddenly give in, and he can't stand up properly, so Betty helps him walk. The next day, however, we see Roy at his apartment, standing well on his feet. He asks his staff to transform his apartment into an office. Soon, the men from a few nights ago, along with two appropriate Russians, arrive at the makeshift office. Roy explains the investment plot that will give them a profit in a week and shows them a keypad that can be used to transfer money into their accounts. They will use this keypad to manage their accounts. After Roy transfers their £200,000 investment into a joint account, the Russians are instructed to transfer £800,000 into the account as planned. Just when everything is going well, Bryn suddenly asks the Russians how much commission they pay to their leader Putin. This weak joke annoys the Russians, causing them to withdraw their investment. Following this, the other investors blame Bryn for not keeping his mouth shut, so Roy says they must regain the Russians' trust. After the meeting, Roy goes to meet Betty. He purposely walks with a cane, pretending to have knee pain. Here, Betty mentions that she recently bought a new car and offers to give him a ride. Roy is delighted when he learns that she bought the car in cash. They then go to Betty's home together and have a pleasant dinner. Later, her grandson Stephen shows up at the house and expresses displeasure after seeing Roy. After dinner, Betty and her grandson accompany Roy to his home. However, when she realizes that he lives on the top floor, she suggests he stay at her place to avoid climbing the stairs. Stephen is hesitant, but Betty insists, so Roy agrees and brings his belongings to her home. The next morning, as Roy drinks coffee outside the house, he sees a new man in a car watching him. Meanwhile, Stephen voices his concerns and warns his grandma that she is getting too close to a complete stranger. But Betty dismisses him, as she has started liking her new date. Roy hears them, but he doesn't take it seriously. His charm endears him to Betty, but the grandson finds his grandma's remarks irritating. Roy then tells Stephen that he has important business to attend to, and Betty tells Stephen to drive him. He must visit a friend who is suffering from pancreatic cancer at the hospital. However, after Stephen leaves, Roy doesn't go inside. Instead, he exits from the back door, loses his supporting cane, and walks all the way to his office like a healthy old man. In the next scene, the Russians return to the office, and Bryn starts by apologizing for his rude comment a few days ago. As a token of this understanding, he reveals that the four of them have doubled their investment fund to make it £400,000. Roy then quickly transfers the money to the joint account, and the Russians also transfer their funds into the joint account, finally sealing the deal. Following this, one of the Russians eagerly hugs Bryn, and this is when Bryn realizes that the Russian is armored with wires, just as they hear police sirens approaching. The police force enters the building, and fortunately, Bryn and his partner manage to escape through the back door. Once Bryn and his partner are gone, it is astonishingly revealed that Roy, the police force along with Vincent, and the two Russians were actually working together to trick Bryn and his partner. They have now gained £200,000 with very little effort. Following the success of his notorious plan, Roy returns and reunites with Stephen at the hospital gate. During dinner, Stephen mentions that he is going away for a while to a place called Spandau Prison, where Nazi war criminals were kept. Stephen then asks Roy if he ever served in the war. The latter takes a short pause and admits to having worked in the army, which resulted in the scar on his neck. After dinner, the elderly couple see of Stephen, and Roy once again notices the man in a silver Audi who has been following him for a while. A few days later, Roy and his partner Vincent visit a butcher shop owned by the same Russian man who was part of their plan. They're going to his place because they hear a complaint, and it turns out Vlad demands more money for his services, but Roy refuses to give him that. Instead, he calls in two of his men. Later, Roy visits Betty's home with his partner Vincent. When she arrives, he introduces Vincent as his investment advisor. Betty is surprised when Roy mentions that he wants to leave something for her from his will. She insists that he should leave everything to his son Robert, but Roy admits that he doesn't like his son's lifestyle. Vincent and Roy then trick Betty into revealing her total wealth, which is around £2.8 million. Impressed by the amount, Vincent starts suggesting that she invest all of her money. He claims that she can get double returns on her investment in the next 5 years. He further tries to persuade her to open a joint account with Roy, but Betty says she needs time to make such a big decision. The next morning, Betty, Roy, and Vincent are sitting outside, discussing how Roy made a profit of £20,000 from his investments. All of a sudden, Stephen arrives. He says that he was dismissed early from work today. Stephen sees the investment documents and reminds his grandma that she is blindly trusting him by giving all of her money to him. Betty is insulted by these words, and Vincent also decides to leave as he believes it's not the right time to make a deal. Meanwhile, Stephen finally realizes his mistake and apologizes for causing the mess. Later, Roy proposes to Betty that he should give £10,000 to Stephen from the £20,000 profit he made, and they could use the remaining £10,000 for a trip. Betty is surprised to hear this, but she is grateful. The following evening, she trims Roy's hair and expresses her desire to go to Berlin. As the two are talking happily, she starts feeling unwell and suddenly collapses to the floor. Roy tries calling an ambulance, but she asks him to just call her doctor. Later, the doctor reveals that she's had another stroke. A worried Roy asks if there is any treatment, but Betty is reluctant to undergo surgeries and bed rest. She doesn't want to live as if she's already dead. That night, Roy tucks Betty to bed, and understanding her condition, he agrees to go to Berlin with her. The next day, while shopping with her, Roy notices he's being followed by Bryn, so he immediately arranges to meet Betty at a restaurant in an hour. Worried, he heads to the underground tube while being followed by Bryn. Bryn soon confronts him, revealing that he has uncovered their scam plot. He now wants his $100,000 back, or else he will reveal Roy's true identity to Betty. Saying this, he proceeds to corner Roy, but our clever hero pushes Bryn onto the tracks, and he manages to escape from there unseen. After the incident, Roy reunites with Betty at the agreed spot and expresses his sudden desire to leave for their trip. In the next scene, the couple arrives in Berlin, where they meet Stephen. He offers to show them around the city, as he seems to know it well. The trio then visits several war museums and attractive architecture. Following this, Betty decides she wants to explore on her own and promises to be back at the hotel on time. Then, we see her standing in front of an old building and sighing deeply. Later, Betty arrives at the hotel with an injured hand. She says that she missed a step on the sidewalk, causing her to fall. Roy tends to her wounds and gently kisses her hands, making the lady more attracted to his kindness. The following day, Stephen drives the couple to a hotel. Roy, on the other hand, tries talking to Vincent, but the call is not connected. While checking into the hotel, the clerk accidentally gives Betty's card instead of Roy's, so the latter insists on getting it back. Just then, Stephen receives a call and learns that his rented apartment has been broken into and all of his belongings were stolen. He gets upset and informs his grandma, so Roy offers to come along with him. Betty feels unwell, but she encourages them to go. Before leaving, Roy assures her that he will be back soon, and she must not worry. Stephen and Roy then head to the scene, where the police are already investigating. Stephen looks around but can't figure out what has been stolen. Instead, he finds a file related to his grandma and quickly hides it in his bag. He now knows what Roy has been up to, so he confronts him about his true intentions. This, however, doesn't surprise Roy, and he tries to mislead Stephen by revealing his past life. Stephen does not fall for his charm and gives Roy one last chance to come clean. But instead, he makes a statement claiming that Betty is not even her real name. Soon after, they return to the hotel to reunite with the lady, who is now shocked to learn this from Stephen. Roy hesitates for a while but finally admits that he once did something awful to a woman. Betty looks even more horrified, so Roy starts to pacify her. He says that he didn't mean to lie, but had to keep some secrets for the sake of their relationship. Stephen, on the other hand, looks at his grandma with concern, but Betty silently picks up her bag and leaves the room, as she is now totally broken. Roy waits for her to come back, and when she doesn't, he suddenly starts feeling unwell. Stephen reveals that Betty already knew about his plans, so she drugged his drink before leaving. Roy tries to reach out to Betty, but Stephen grabs him and forces him to sit. Stephen then opens the bag and pulls out several photographs of a young man who appears to be Roy. It turns out that Betty's real name is Lili, and she actually met Roy long before he could even remember. Stephen further reveals that his grandma is a survivor of war crimes, and she escaped from Nazi Germany when the Allied forces invaded the country. However, she lost her family and friends in the camps, and that's when she met Roy, who was then an officer. Roy pretended to be her friend and gave her a new identity, but instead of helping her escape, he handed her over to the enemies, who killed her loved ones. Stephen claims that this is the ultimate revenge for his grandma, as she has successfully exposed the heartless scammer that Roy is. As Roy tries to absorb all of this, Stephen informs him that the investment account is now empty, and everything has been returned to Betty. Saying this, Stephen leaves, and the two men return to London. The final scene shows a broken and exhausted Roy, standing alone in his shabby apartment. He picks up a photo of his late wife and stares at it for a while before collapsing on the bed. Meanwhile, Betty is seen happily cooking in her kitchen, surrounded by the love of her family.